that were all dictated by the Christian religion, the Catholic Legion of Decency at the time, that could be not put in films. And Hollywood did that primarily. One of the reasons was because Hollywood was looked as like this kind of dark and seedy place where, people got away with whatever they wanted to. And Paramount in particular had gotten in trouble in the 1920s for like Fatty Arbuckle sexually harassing and supposedly murdering a young starlet named Virginia Rapide. There was a young starlet named Peg Entwistle who threw herself off the Hollywood sign. There was a film director named William Desmond Taylor who was supposedly shot by Mabel Normand, who was his lover, but then he could have also been gay. There was a possibility that he was shot by his gay lover. So at the time, in 1933, Hollywood was looked on as a very dark and seedy place. So Will Hayes implemented with the Catholic Legion of Decency the production code, which meant you could not have certain things on the screen. You could not have interracial couples on the screen. You could not have homosexual relations on the screen. You could not have sexual relations on the screen. I mean, it even went so far as to say, like, if there was a female laying in a bed, a man could not walk up to the bed and sit on the edge of the bed, because then that could lead to something else. So that couldn't even be in a film. So Warner Brothers had produced pre-1933, as they did after 1933 as well, these very dark and gritty gangster films, where all sorts of different things went on. And all of those different things in those films, it was known as pre-code. So, they had people drinking alcohol, people having sex, people cussing, which after the production code, they couldn't do anymore. That's a very roundabout way of saying that in 1933, when the production code went into effect, Warner Brothers thought, okay, well, we can keep making these dark and gritty gangster films, but we also need to look at other properties that we can produce. So in 1934, they turned their attention to Max Reinhardt. Max Reinhardt was a Broadway producer who had produced several big things on Broadway in the 1920s, and he was at the time producing a production of Midsummer Night's Dream at the Hollywood Bowl, and he had also produced that on Broadway in 1927. And Warner Brothers, somebody from Warner Brothers, I'm not exactly sure or who saw it. I think Jack Warner might even have been in the audience in one of the performances. But they thought, well, we can adapt this for the screen. So they bought it, Max Reinhardt's production, and they hired him as a director, and then they used all of their biggest stars under contract, Warner Brothers did. And they produced a giant spectacle of a film of Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, which came out in 1935. Now, interesting little fact is that in 1934, Olivia de Havilland had graduated high school, and she had been interested in drama in high school, and she was immediately cast in a production of Midsummer Night's Dream at Saratoga Community Theater, which was in California. An assistant of Max Reinhardt's was at the production of Saratoga Community Theater's Midsummer Night's Dream. He saw her. She was playing Puck at that time, and he said, how would you like to understudy the role of Hermia in Max Reinhardt's production of Midsummer Night's Dream? So
she was 18?
Yeah, she was 18.
That's wild.
She's very young. They were all very young.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the leads in these films were younger than we were now. We're old. We're old garbage now.
Yeah, but hey, man, cigarettes age you so quick.
Oh, I know.
Cigarettes and booze,
alcohol,
man. Nobody, like,
unprotected sex will do a number on you, too.
I look at Olivia de Havilland, I'm like, okay, yeah, she would have been 22, I guess, at the time of Robin Hood.
Yes.
Because it's 4 years later.
She looks so much older.
23. Yeah, I mean, she looks mid-20s. And I think Errol Flynn was like 29, right? He was
28.
28.
Yeah.
He looks 35. Nicotine's one hell of a drug, man.
I know. Well, and there's also remind me to talk about like Errol Flynn's backstory and his history with drugs and malaria and tuberculosis, because that's a fun journey to go down too. But anyway, Olivia de Havilland was in Max Reinhardt's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Hollywood Bowl. Somebody from Warner Brothers saw it and thought, this is a property that we can produce that is not going to be a dark and dirty gangster film that goes against the code. Yeah. So in 1935, they used all of their biggest contract stars. They threw as much money as they possibly could, and they produced Midsummer Night's Dream, the film, directed by Max Reinhardt. Now, in 1935, the costume consultant on A Midsummer Night's Dream was a man, 47-year-old man named Dwight Franklin. And Dwight Franklin saw James Cagney in A Midsummer Night's Dream. He had dressed James Cagney in his costume, and he was wearing, like you said, it was a boy's costume, boy's outfit. He was wearing like a Robin Hood style cap, a Robin Hood style vest, and Robin Hood style boots.
I can't imagine that. James Cagney, the gangster at heights.
Oh, I know. He was Bottom the Weaver. But anyway, Dwight Franklin sent a memo to Jack Warner, the head of Warner Brothers, and said, "Don't you think Cagney would make a swell Robin Hood, maybe as a follow-up to The Dream," which is Midsummer Night's Dream, with the gang as his merry men, Frank McHugh, Alan Jenkins, Ross Alexander, Hugh Herbert, etc., entirely different from the Fairbanks picture, which was the 1922 Douglas Fairbanks film. I have a lot of ideas on this if you are interested. So none of the men he suggested as the merry men ended up in The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938, even though they were all under contract to Warner Brothers, because some of them had moved on and some of them were very busy at the time that Warner Brothers started shooting. So in 1935, Jack Warner got this memo and he was like, yes, that would be absolutely fantastic. At the time, there was another independent movie studio that released their movies through United Artists, which was a movie studio that was formed by Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and Charlie Chaplin, I think in the 1920s. Anyway, Reliance Pictures released their movies through United Artists, and they were working on an adaptation of Robin Hood with the English star Robert Donat. And he was supposed to be in their film, but he pulled out because he loved the stage so much that practically every time he signed a Hollywood contract, he would pull out of that contract to go do a stage play. So, Reliance Pictures had worked on research and script treatment for a film adaptation of Robin Hood. And then, at the same time, MGM had just had a massive success in 1935 with Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy, which were a new musical pairing for MGM, in a film called Naughty Marietta. And there was a man in the late 19th century named Sir Reginald de Koven, and he wrote comic operas. And he had written a comic opera that was an adaptation of the Robin Hood tale. So MGM was looking in to making The Adventures of Robin Hood as a comic opera with Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy, using Reginald de Koven's music for the comic opera. Now, Warner Brothers actually owned, because they originally, I think they wanted to turn Douglas Fairbanks' film from 1922, use some of the lyrics from that opera. So they had purchased from the Reginald de Koven estate the book and the lyrics to that comic opera. MGM purchased the music. Reliance Pictures had done script treatments and research on the film. So then MGM purchased for $62,500 Reliance Pictures script treatment and research on the film. And Warner Brothers owned the book and the lyrics. So what ended up happening was, because Reliance Pictures kind of abandoned that entire thing when Robert Donat pulled out, so Reliance Pictures had research and script treatment on The Adventures of Robin Hood. Warner Brothers owned the book and the lyrics to Reginald de Koven's comic opera.
Gotcha.
But MGM owned the music. So MGM traded the script treatment and the research that they had bought from Reliance Pictures to Warner Brothers for Warner Brothers' rights to the book and the lyrics of Reginald de Koven's comic opera. So then, a month after Dwight Franklin, the costume consultant on Midsummer Night's Dream, sent his memo to Jack Warner in 1935, Luella Parsons posted in her column that James Cagney would be playing Robin Hood in an upcoming Warner Brothers adaptation of Robin Hood. But what happened was James Cagney walked out on his contract at Warner Brothers in November of 1935, claiming that the studio was overworking him, and he sued Warner's for breach of contract when a neighborhood movie theater put Pat O'Brien's name on their marquee on a film called Ceiling Zero. Cagney's contract stipulated that he would always get top billing on the marquee, so he walked out of his contract.
Petty, man. I mean, I'm sure it mattered to him, but...
Well, and plus, I'm not completely surprised. It partly had to do with the marquee, but it also had to do with he was being overworked.
Yeah.
And a lot of different stars
and that's probably
were walking
the last
out.
straw. He's like, they can't even get my name right.
I know.
And it was just some teenager putting up the numbers, the letters.
I know. And it's like, it's not even the studio's fault.
Yeah.
But he probably like you just said, he needed a reason to validate him walking out on his contract.
Uh-huh.
Because a lot of the contract stars at the time were being overworked. Like Olivia de Havilland, after finishing shooting principal photography on the Adventures of Robin Hood, she went to the doctor and he diagnosed her with all sorts of illnesses related to exhaustion. So because they would just make movie after movie after movie after movie. So on top of the properties acquired from Reliance via MGM, producer Hal B. Wallace, who was known as the Star Maker, that's actually the name of his autobiography, is Star Maker. He was responsible for creating some stars such as Errol Flynn, Betty Davis, James Cagney. So Hal B. Wallace hired London-born screenwriter Rowland Lee to work up a script treatment with Dr. Herman, I think it's Lissauer. It's Lissauer. And he was the studio's research director, and his staff researched the gargantuan task of studying 12th century England, which is I would think would be a great big task, because there wouldn't be that many, like you said, there wouldn't be that many books that chronicled 12th century England and how people did things and different stuff like that.
Yeah, nobody knew,
Yeah, I know. So, I mean, is the movie even visually historically accurate? Who knows?
I would probably say not. I think honestly, a lot of our perception of the Middle Ages, with knights and things and armor, a lot of that actually comes from the High Middle Ages, which is a lot closer to the Renaissance.
I know a lot of the sword and the swords and the fencing and stuff like that weren't exactly accurate, but they looked good on film.
Yeah,
so
that's what they taught us in Stage Combat. They specifically talked about Robin Hood because they developed a new sword style that looked good on film, because traditional, the way you actually kill people with the sword isn't as interesting, I guess.
Anyway, Dwight Franklin, who had sent the memo to Jack Warner saying that Cagney would have made a great Robin Hood, was at the same time that Cagney walked off the lot, was working on a picture called Captain Blood in 1935. It was not Errol Flynn's first film, but it was his first big hit at Warner Brothers, and it was directed by Michael Curtiz, who he was the second and last director of The Adventures of Robin Hood, and Captain Blood was his first big success as a director at Warner Brothers as well. With Cagney walking off the lot, a search was made for another Robin Hood. At the same time that Cagney walked off of the lot, another film was in production, Captain Blood, which was Flynn's first big success. The film was originally supposed to star Leslie Howard and then Brian Ahern. Ahern and Howard did not work out, so Flynn got the part. With the success of Captain Blood in 1935, with Olivia de Havilland, and then Charge of the Light Brigade in 1936, also with Olivia de Havilland, Flynn was cast by Warner Brothers as Robin Hood as early as 1936. So the original English-born screenwriter, Rowland Lee, who is working on the Reliance script treatment and research to write The Adventures of Robin Hood for Warner Brothers, was eventually taken off of production of Robin Hood, as he wanted to cut out the character of Maid Marian entirely from the film, and his writing was too Shakespearean. Hal B. Wallace wrote in a memo, "You cannot have the maid or anyone else reading lines such as, 'Oh, my lord, tarry not too long, for I fear in her remorse she may fling herself from the window. Some harm will befall her, I know. It won't do.'"
The maid was supposed to say that?
Yes.
Oh my god.
So his first script treatment did not cut out the character of Maid Marian. It was just a very fast, small romance. She was a very small part of the film. And Hal B. Wallace didn't like that, so Rowland Lee said, "All right, well, then I'll just cut her out of the movie." And then he also wrote dialogue like that, too Shakespearean. Nobody would understand what was going on, So then Hal B. Wallace hired Norman Riley Raine to replace Lee, and he had just won an Oscar for writing the screenplay of The Life of Emile Zola. And he was given Lee's treatment as well as all of the properties acquired from MGM. He was instructed to keep color in mind when rewriting. Technicolor especially. I mean, there was really nothing else at the time except Technicolor. The Nazis were working on their own Agfacolor, which eventually came over to MGM in the 1950s as Anstrocolor. But that's a totally different story. So originally, the film was supposed to be this big black and white spectacle. with James Cagney. And this was the first time when Norman Riley Rain was eventually hired to replace Rowland Lee that they were like, keep Technicolor in mind. Just a bit on Jack Warner. He was always up for using the new technological advancements of the day because he thought that that would bring people into the box office. The Warner Brothers was